Hello, my name is Noah Abji, and today we're going to learn how to divide decimals with digits past the thousandths place. So let's begin. So dividing longer decimals, which are basically decimals that have digits past the thousandths place, which is 3 or 4 numbers to the right of the decimal point, also uses long division, just like dividing decimals normally. Now, you should already know how to do long division, especially with decimals would be helpful. But if you don't, I'll do a quick review of how to do it normally with decimals, so then we can compare it to doing it past the thousandths place. So let's look at one example. So if we are to divide 7.4 by 5, we would set it up into a normal long division question. Just like any division, we use long division to divide decimals. So 7.4 divided by 5, with the number being divided going on the inside, and the number that we're dividing by going on the outside. So now our next step, and this is the case whenever you're dividing by any decimal, is always to put the decimal point in your answer right above where it is in what you're dividing. So now 5 goes into 7 one time. So we put a 1 here. So 1 times 5 is 5. 7 minus 5 is 2. And then we bring down this 4 to get 24. 5 goes into 24 4 times. So notice how we kept the decimal point right above where it was in our answer compared to in the question. And we put our numbers right above the numbers we're dividing by. When we divided the 7, we put the 1 above the 7. When we're dividing this 24, since we just brought down the 4, we put our 4 above this 4 over here. So now multiply. 4 multiplied by 5 is 20. Subtract. 24 minus 20 is 4. And this is the rule with decimals. Whenever you have the decimal point already placed, you can just start adding zeros to the end instead of having a remainder to finish the question. Here's why. If you think about it, 7.4, which is what we had before, is the exact same number as 7.40. They're equal. So adding zeros doesn't actually change the value of the number we're dividing. Dividing 7.4 and 7.40 by 5 is the same thing. But what it does is it gives us more numbers to bring down. So we can add as many zeros to the end of this as we would like. And we'll bring it down to the bottom now. 5 goes into 40 8 times. Now 8 times 5 is 40. And when we subtract, we get 0. So that's how we know that this question is done. We get 1.48 when we divide 7.4 by 5. And if you'd like to look at this for a few seconds, I'll give you a few seconds to pause the video possibly before I move on to the next practice question. All right, so now let's look at how to divide decimals with digits past the thousandths place. Now it may look a little bit scary. This has a lot of digits in it. It has 8 digits total. Half of them are zeros though. And so it's actually the same type of question. It's a division question, so we're going to set it up into long division. So let's draw our box with a 5 on the outside since we're dividing by 5. And then on the inside, we put 0.0002716. All right. So our first step, again, when we're dividing with decimals, is always to move the decimal point to where it is in the answer. So it's in what we're dividing by right here, it's right here. And so we're going to put it right above that in our answer. So move the decimal point. So now what we need to do is do our same long division. Now, these zeros might throw you off, but they're just numbers. So we're going to do the same process. We're going to see, does 5 go into 0? And the answer is that it goes into it 0 times total. So we're going to put a 0 here. Now we multiply and we can subtract, and we end up with 0. And if we keep bringing down zeros, we're going to end up with the same thing. It'll go into it 0 times here, and here, and here. So we can think of it as we're going to end up with a bunch of zeros at the bottom here if we did this out. And you can do it out if you want, and you'll just end up with a bunch of zeros in both your answer and at the bottom. Now we get to the numbers that we're bringing down. So now we get to a 2, for example. 5 goes into 2 0 times. So we're going to put a 0 right here. 0 multiplied by 5 is 0. So we're going to subtract, and we get 2 again. Now we're going to bring down a 7. So we bring down the 7. 5 goes into 27 5 times total. So we're going to put a 5 above the 7. 5 multiplied by 5 is 25. Subtract, and we get 2. Bring down the 1. 5 goes into 21 4 times. 4 times 5 is 20. And 21 minus 20 is 1. Bring down the 6. And try to keep your work organized when you do long division to make sure you're keeping track of everything. 5 goes into 16 3 times. So 3 times 5 is 15. Subtract, and we get 1. And now we can just keep adding zeros on the end until we don't need to anymore, until we finish the question. So we add 1 0 on the end and bring it down. Because remember, adding a 0 to the end of a decimal, because we already have the decimal point, doesn't change the value of the number we're dividing by. So we're going to put a 0 here. 5 goes into 10 and even 2 times. So 2 times 5 is 10. And when we subtract, we end up with 0 as our remainder here. So our final answer is just 0.000005432. And so you'll notice that every time we had a 0 in the number we're dividing by, we have a 0 in our answer. And that will always be the case if you're dividing by a number greater than 1 here. So anytime you're dividing by a number greater than 1, so let's say we're dividing 0.003 by 4, your answer will start with 3 zeros. It'll start with 0.00 something. And in this case, it'd be 0.00075 if you did it out. But notice, you're automatically going to have at least this many zeros, because that's how many you started with. So the zeros really aren't something to worry about. You just use your long division skills normally with them, and you'll end up with the correct answer. All right, so now we're going to do some review questions. If you'd like to try them, I'll give you a few seconds to pause the video before I explain the answer. All right, so the correct answer to these questions were 0.000070925 and 0.667043. So let's do the first one. All right, so setting it up into a normal, actually I'm going to undo that, into a normal long division question. Spread out all our numbers neatly, only 3 zeros at the beginning, then 2837 divided by 4. So we put it in the box, and now we have our long division question. Now just to save some time, we're going to move the decimal point right above, like I said, and since it starts with 4 zeros, we can actually just write zeros above where those zeros were in the number we're dividing by, just like I explained on the last slide. So now 4 goes into 2 0 times. So 0 times 4 is 0, and we have our first part of the subtraction. 2 minus 0 is 2, and now let's bring down this 8. 4 goes into 28 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28, and we end up with another 0 down here. And don't let all these zeros scare you, because look, we're already to the last half of the question. All these zeros mean is that you're going to have them in your answer. So they actually, believe it or not, even though there's a lot of digits, they're not going to take much more time. So now let's bring down our 3. 4 goes into 3 0 times, so we'll put a 0 here, and multiply by 4, that's 0, and subtract, and we get 3 down here. It should be 3. Now when we bring down our 7, we get 37. 4 goes into 37 6 times. Or I'm sorry, 9 times. So 9 times 4 is 36, and let's subtract, and we get a 1 down here. Now again, since we already have this decimal point, adding zeros to the end of this isn't going to change. It's not going to change the value of the number. So we can add as many zeros as we like to complete the question. So now bring down one of those zeros. 4 goes into 10 2 times. So 2 times 4 is 8. If we subtract, we get 2. Bring down one more 0, and we get 20, which is a nice number because 4 goes into 20, and even 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20, And when we subtract, we end up with 0 at the bottom, which is how we know we're finished. So make sure to count your zeros correctly when you're writing the answer. It is 0.00000, so starts with 5 zeros total, 70925. And if you want to look at this, I suggest pausing the video now because in a few seconds we're moving on. All right, so moving on to the second question, we can also set this one up into long division. And you'll notice, unlike the rest of the questions we've been doing, it doesn't just start with a bunch of zeros. So we actually have to do it out at the beginning instead of just zeroing everything at the top. Now, what is the same is we're going to write the decimal point where it is in our answer. And after we do that, the decimal point here doesn't actually matter. So we can just take it out of our the number we're dividing completely. So 3 goes into 2 0 times. 0 times 3 is 0, but this is why it's important, because we get 2 at the bottom and bring down a 0. So now instead of having 0, 0 like we would have had in the previous questions, we have 20. 3 goes into 20 6 times. 6 times 3 is 18, and 20 minus 18 is 2. So now let's bring down another 0, and we get 20 again. So same thing, 6, 18, and 2. Now let's bring down a 1. 3 goes into 21 7 times. So 7 times 3 is 21, and when we subtract that, we get 0. Now let's bring down another 1. Now 3 goes into just 1 0 times, so we can write a 0 in our answer. Above the 1, I'm getting a little bit off to the side here, but I want to make sure it's right above the number we just divided to keep things organized. 0 times 3 is 0, and when we subtract, we end up with 1. Now bring down a 2, we get 12. 3 goes into 12 4 times. 4 times 3 is 12, and when we subtract, we get 0. And finally, we can bring down this last 9, and 3 goes into 9 3 times. And if you ever run out of space, you can continue the question like this by just rewriting part of it over to the side here. So that's what I'll do actually. 3 goes into 9 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. So let's subtract, and we end up with 0 as a remainder. Now, if you needed to bring down another number, you do something like this to save some space, but we don't need to because we end up with 0 as our remainder. So this is our final answer, 0.667043. So just as we've seen, dividing decimals past the thousandths place isn't actually that scary. It's the same thing as before, except it might just take a little bit longer. And when you have a bunch of zeros at the beginning here, you can actually just write them out in your answer, which makes it nice and easy. That's all, and thank you for watching.